Have you ever done the right thing and watched it destroy your life anyway? Marcus Wade stared at the words on his phone screen, the letters blurring as his hand trembled. Subject line: immediate suspension. Pending investigation. His checking account sat at $680. Rent would hit in 12 days. His daughter was homesick, and without this job, her health insurance would vanish like morning fog over Puget Sound. 12 hours ago, he'd been invisible. Just another driver in a black suit waiting in hotel service quarters, while executives drank champagne they didn't pay for and laughed at jokes that weren't funny enough to deserve it. Now his face was on gossip sites. Strangers were texting him congratulations and condemnations in equal measure. The company he'd served for 3 years had cut him loose before asking a single question. All because he'd helped someone who needed it. The morning had started normal. 6:15 on Friday the 13th September. Light filtering weak through the curtains of their one-bedroom apartment in Renton. Marcus stood at the stove flipping eggs, while Iris sat at their small kitchen table, concentration fierce as she worked a colored pencil across construction paper. At 7 years old, she approached art with the same intensity she brought to everything else, completely without reservation, trusting the world would hold steady beneath her feet. Her curls formed a dark halo around her face, wild from sleep, despite his attempts at brushing. The apartment smelled like coffee and cinnamon toast, familiar and safe. On the refrigerator, held by a turtle-shaped magnet, hung her latest masterpiece. A stick figure man and a cape smaller figure beside him, both surrounded by a heart drawn in red marker. Marcus slid the eggs onto her plate, added 2 strips of bacon, set it down with the careful attention of someone who knew. Breakfast mattered. Iris looked up from her drawing, her eyes darker than his but shaped the same, held that mix of curiosity and worry he'd been seeing more often lately. "Dad, how come you don't do the job you went to college for?" He poured her milk, buying himself 3 seconds to consider his answer. She was asking about the degree in criminal justice that hung in a drawer somewhere unused, about the paramedic certification he'd let lapse, about all the potential he'd traded for a schedule that let him be present. "Because driving lets me pick you up at 3:15 every single day. That's the most important work I do." Tyler's dad is never home. Tyler says his dad has an important job. Marcus crouched beside her chair, bringing himself level with her gaze. This was the move his father had taught him: meet them where they are, eye to eye, nothing between you. "Do you think I'm not important?" She shook her head hard enough to make her curls bounce. The gesture was so emphatic, so certain, it cracked something open in his chest the way it always did when his daughter said something true and devastating without realizing the weight of it. "You're the most important. You're always there. That's the job that matters most to me, being your dad." The words came out steady, but behind them lived a question he couldn't quite silence. Was it enough, or was he hiding from bigger ambitions behind the excuse of good parenting? Iris went back to her drawing. Marcus returned to the counter, poured his own coffee, and tried not to think about the credit card statement that would arrive next week, or the fact that his car needed new brake pads, or that Iris was growing so fast her shoes lasted maybe 4 months before her toes pressed against the front. She held up the new picture. 2 butterflies' wings, different colors, both wearing tiny capes. "Miss Ramirez taught us about butterflies yesterday. She said they start as caterpillars and go in a cocoon, and it's really dark and scary, and they don't know what's happening, but then they come out and they're butterflies and they can fly and help the garden grow." Marcus studied the drawing, seeing something in it he couldn't quite name. Change, transformation, the necessity of darkness before flight. She said sometimes changing is scary, but it makes you able to do things you couldn't do before, like help people. He thought about his own metamorphosis from paramedic racing toward emergencies with sirens wailing to driver, waiting patiently in parking garages. Was that evolution or retreat? Had he emerged from the cocoon or just found a more comfortable place to hide? Iris was still looking at him, waiting for acknowledgement. "That's beautiful, kiddo. We can put it on the fridge when it's done." She nodded, satisfied, and went back to coloring. Marcus checked his phone. 6:40. He needed to get her to school by 7:30, then head to the Hayes Technologies garage for his first assignment of the day. The schedule was predictable, reliable, the kind of structure that let him plan their lives with precision. Breakfast at 6:15, school drop-off at 7:30, work from 8 until pickup time, home by 3:45. Homework, dinner, bedtime routine. Every day the same, every day safe. At the door, Iris's backpack slung over her shoulders, too big for her small frame, making her look even younger than 7. She paused with her hand on the doorknob. Dad, do people who help others sometimes get punished for it? The question landed like a stone dropped into still water, ripples spreading outward. Where'd you hear that? Some kid said his dad got fired for reporting something bad at work. I said that wasn't fair. Marcus knelt again this time because his knees suddenly felt unreliable. His daughter was asking about justice, about whether the world rewarded goodness or punished it. At 7 years old, she was already testing whether the stories he told her about how things should work matched the reality she was starting to see. You're right, it's not fair. But the world isn't always fair, sweetheart. That's why good people have to keep trying anyway. She considered this with the seriousness she brought to everything. Finally nodded as if filing the information away for later examination and headed out the door. Marcus watched her climb into the back seat of his battered Corolla, buckle herself in with practiced efficiency, and felt the familiar weight settle on his shoulders. The responsibility of being the person she trusted, absolutely the person who defined for her what adults should be. He didn't know it then, but in about 14 hours, her question would feel less like innocent curiosity and more like prophecy. The Hayes Technologies Anniversary Gala occupied the grand ballroom of the Fairmont Olympic Hotel, one of those downtown Seattle landmarks where the chandeliers probably cost more than Marcus made in 2 years. The space glowed amber and gold, filled with tech executives in custom suits and engineers who looked uncomfortable in formal wear, all of them drinking champagne and networking with the aggressive friendliness of people who knew this was part of the job. Marcus stood near the service entrance with 7 other company drivers, all of them wearing identical black suits and the same expression of patient invisibility. They were furniture, part of the infrastructure, present but unnoticed, which was exactly how it should be. Deshaun Carter leaned against the wall beside him, a man in his early 40s with the kind of relaxed confidence that came from 8 years of driving executives around and learning that most of what seemed important really wasn't. He'd taken Marcus under his wing 3 years ago, when Marcus had first started taught him the unwritten rules. Never initiate conversation unless asked, always have water and mints in the console, pretend you can't hear their phone calls even when you obviously can. His voice came low, barely audible over the string quartet. Boss lady looks shaky tonight. Marcus followed his gaze to the stage where Victoria Hayes stood under a spotlight, delivering a speech about innovation and legacy and the future her father had built before cancer took him 18 months ago. She wore a deep blue dress that caught the light, her blonde hair pulled back in a style that looked effortless, but probably took an hour to achieve. Everything about her presentation screamed control power, the kind of person who never showed weakness. But Marcus had spent 5 years as a paramedic before taking this job. He'd learned to read people in crisis, to see past the performance to the pain underneath. And Victoria Hayes was performing. Her hand trembled slightly as she gripped the podium. Her voice caught almost imperceptibly when she mentioned her father. She was holding herself together with wire and willpower, and Marcus could practically see the effort it took. 2 years since the old man died, Deshaun continued. Tough day to have to smile and shake hands and pretend everything's fine. Rich people have problems too. Sure, but at least they can cry in penthouses instead of studio apartments. The comment should have been funny, but something about Victoria's expression killed the humor. She looked alone up there, completely profoundly alone, surrounded by 400 people who worked for her or wanted something from her, but none of whom actually saw her. Marcus's phone buzzed against his hip. He pulled it out discreetly. Mrs. Harper, their neighbor and Iris's evening sitter, had sent a photo Iris asleep on Marcus's bed, stuffed giraffe tucked under one arm, math homework spread across the comforter. The image made his chest tighten with the particular ache of missing someone who was only 20 miles away. At 9:47, his phone rang. Not a text, an actual call. The screen showed CEO Direct Line. He stepped into the hallway, answered on the second ring. The voice on the other end was thin and tight, like someone holding themselves together with wire. Nothing like the confident tone she'd used on stage. I need a ride. Now. No security, no assistant, just you. Marcus didn't ask questions. Something in her voice made questions feel dangerous, like they might shatter whatever was holding her upright. "I'll be there in 2 minutes." He moved through the hotel with the purposeful invisibility he'd perfected, took the service elevator down to the garage and pulled the company Audi Black Anonymous, designed not to be remembered, around to the valet circle. Victoria appeared in the glass doors 10 minutes later, moving carefully like someone testing the stability of the ground beneath them. The confidence from the stage had evaporated. Her smile was gone. Her posture had collapsed inward. She looked like someone who'd been holding their breath for hours and finally reached a place where they could let it out. The hotel valet moved toward her, but Marcus was faster, stepping out and opening the rear door in one smooth motion. She stumbled slightly at the curb, not drunk stumbling, but the kind of imbalance that comes from exhaustion or emotional overload, or both. He caught her elbow, not her waist, not her arm, just enough contact to steady her without assuming intimacy. Professional, appropriate. The kind of help that didn't carry implications. She smelled like wine and expensive perfume and something underneath that might have been fear or exhaustion. The words came out quiet, barely audible over the sound of taxis and valet attendants calling for cars. "Thank you." The valet handed Marcus a key card in a small envelope, Victoria's building address printed on it. The look the valet gave him was brief but clear. "Good luck." Marcus closed her door, returned to the driver's seat, and pulled into Friday night Seattle traffic. Rain had started, the kind of fine mist that made the city look like it was dissolving at the edges. Streetlights blurred into smears of gold and red. The car was silent, except for the hum of tires on wet pavement and the occasional swish of windshield wipers. Victoria sat in the back, staring out the window, her reflection small and ghostly against the dark glass. Marcus kept his eyes on the road and his mouth shut. People didn't hire drivers because they wanted conversation. They hired drivers because they wanted a space where they didn't have to perform. But then Victoria spoke, and her voice was different than it had been on stage. Softer, sadder, more real. "My dad would have hated tonight." Marcus glanced in the rearview mirror. Her reflection looked lost. "He would have called it performance art. All those people pretending they care about the mission when really they just want to know if their stock options are going to make them rich." Marcus didn't offer an opinion. He didn't tell her she was wrong or right. He just drove and let her words sit in the space between them, giving them room to exist without judgment. They passed Pike Place Market, shuttered for the night. Past office towers lit up like vertical cities. The streets were slick and mostly empty, the after-work crowd already home, the nightlife crowd not yet emerged. It was the in-between time when Seattle felt like a city holding its breath. After a long silence, Marcus heard himself say something he hadn't planned. "You don't have to perform in here." Victoria let out a breath that sounded like it had been trapped in her chest for years. "When my dad died, they told me I had to be strong. The company needs stability. The board needs confidence. Nobody asked what I needed. Nobody asked if I was okay. They just told me to be strong, and I've been performing strong for 2 years, and I'm so tired I can barely remember what not performing feels like." The confession hung in the air between them. Marcus understood in that moment that he was hearing something she didn't say often. Maybe something she'd never said out loud. He was a stranger in a car, someone safe precisely because he was nobody, because tomorrow he'd go back to being invisible, and she'd go back to being the CEO, and this conversation would exist in a bubble outside the normal rules of her life. They drove in silence after that, winding through downtown streets toward Belltown. Victoria's building was one of those new glass towers where every unit cost more than Marcus would make in a decade. The lobby was all marble and recessed lighting, designed to make residents feel like they'd ascended to a different altitude of existence. Marcus pulled up to the entrance. A doorman in a long coat stepped forward with an umbrella, but Victoria didn't reach for her door handle. She just sat there staring at the building like it was a place she didn't want to enter. Finally, she tried the handle. Her coordination was off, not dramatically drunk, but compromised enough that the simple mechanical action became difficult. Her hand kept sliding past the release, pushing in the wrong direction. Marcus got out, walked around, opened it for her, offered his hand. She took it, holding on a second longer than necessary, her grip tight enough that he could feel the tremor in her fingers. Inside the lobby, Victoria moved toward the elevator bank, then stopped. Stared at the keycard reader like it was a puzzle she couldn't solve. Her hand moved toward the slot and missed. Moved again, the card sliding past the sensor at odd angles. She tried 3 times, each attempt less coordinated than the last. Marcus watched for a moment, then stepped forward carefully. "May I?" She handed him the card without looking at him. Marcus swiped it once smooth and sure, and the elevator doors opened. He stepped back to let her enter, maintaining the professional distance that had kept him safe and employed for 3 years. The doors started to close. Then Victoria's hand shot out and stopped them. "Don't leave." The words came out raw and unguarded, the kind of vulnerability that costs something to reveal. No performance, no CEO voice, just a person asking for help in the only way she knew how. Marcus's instinct was to reassure her and step away to maintain the line that kept his job uncomplicated and his life stable. This was the moment to call her assistant, to contact building security, to find literally anyone else to be responsible for the situation. Every ounce of professional self-preservation screamed at him to politely decline and walk away. But he looked at her, standing in that elevator barefoot now, because she'd slipped off her heels somewhere between the car and the lobby, and he saw someone who was scared and alone and asking for help the way Iris asked when she woke from bad dreams. Not with words about monsters or darkness, but with a simple request: stay. Don't leave me by myself. He thought about the question Iris had asked that morning. Do people who help others get punished for it? He thought about the promises he'd made to his daughter about what kind of person he was. He thought about his ex-wife's voice the day she'd left. "You're too good, Marcus. You don't know when to walk away." And then he thought about how being present for someone who needed you wasn't complicated. It was just human. Sickness hadn't changed since his paramedic days. You saw someone in distress, you helped. The context might be different, but the principle remained. "I'll make sure you get inside safely." The elevator rose in silence. Victoria leaned against the wall, eyes closed, breathing deliberately. When the doors opened on the 22nd floor, Marcus let her lead the way down a hallway lined with abstract art and recessed lighting that made everything look like a museum after hours. She got the door open on the second try and stepped inside, then turned and looked at him like she was seeing him for the first time. Really seeing him not as a driver or an employee or a service, but as a person who had chosen to show up when she needed someone. The apartment was exactly what Marcus expected. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, furniture that looked like sculpture, white leather and glass and stone, the kind of space designed by people who thought comfort meant aesthetics rather than warmth. Everything was cold and perfect and utterly impersonal, like a hotel suite no one actually lived in. Victoria moved toward the kitchen and gripped the counter, swaying slightly. Marcus's paramedic training kicked in automatically, running through the assessment checklist he'd learned years ago. Patient, conscious, responsive, mobile, but unsteady. No visible injuries. Intoxicated, but not dangerously so. Main risk: falling, aspiration, if vomiting, dehydration. He scanned the space, quickly located the glasses, filled one with water from the refrigerator dispenser. Found aspirin in a bathroom cabinet, the medicine cabinet of someone who lived alone, organized but sparse. Brought both to where she stood. "Drink this, all of it. Take 2 of these." Victoria obeyed like a child following instructions, drinking the water in long, steady pulls. When the glass was empty, she set it down with exaggerated care, the kind of precise movement drunk people make when they're trying to prove they're not that impaired. "You should lie down." She turned toward the bedroom hallway and took 3 steps before her legs betrayed her. Marcus moved fast, catching her before she could fall, one arm around her shoulders, careful and controlled, the kind of support that was about safety rather than intimacy. He walked her to the bedroom door and stopped at the threshold like it was a border he wouldn't cross without explicit permission. "Can you make it from here?" Victoria nodded, moving carefully toward the bed. She sat on the edge of it and put her face in her hands. For a moment, she just sat there, shoulders curved inward, and Marcus couldn't tell if she was crying or trying not to cry or just gathering strength to keep existing. Then so quietly, he almost missed it. "Don't leave." The same words, but softer this time. Almost a whisper, the kind of request that came from somewhere deeper than logic or propriety. Marcus looked at the doorway, at the hallway beyond, at the front door 30 feet away. He thought about the key card in his pocket, about the car waiting downstairs, about how easy it would be to slip out and pretend this night had never extended past the lobby. His job would be secure. His life would remain uncomplicated. He could go home to Iris in their small apartment and their predictable routine, and never think about Victoria Hayes again, except as a name on his assignment sheet. But he also thought about Iris asking him to stay until she fell asleep, about sitting outside her door in the hallway, listening to her breathe until her fear passed, about how fear didn't listen to logic, about how sometimes the right thing was just being present when someone needed you to be, even when, especially when it was inconvenient or risky or likely to be misunderstood. There was another voice too, the one that had belonged to his ex-wife. You give too much, Marcus. You save everyone else and forget to save yourself. You think helping is always the answer, but sometimes walking away is the brave thing to do. She'd been right in her way. He did this. He stayed when leaving made more sense. He helped when helping cost him. It was the thing that had made him a good paramedic and probably a bad husband, the inability to see someone in need and not respond. But this was different. This wasn't some grand rescue fantasy. This was just another human being asking not to be alone when being alone felt dangerous. And Marcus couldn't walk away from that. Couldn't teach Iris that the right thing to do was abandon people when they were vulnerable just because staying was complicated. I'll be right out here, on the couch. Victoria lifted her head. Her eyes were red-rimmed but clear enough to hold his gaze. Promise? Marcus nodded once, certain and steady, committing to something he didn't fully understand but couldn't refuse. Promise, Bond. He closed the bedroom door behind him and returned to the living room. The couch was white leather, firm and cold, clearly designed for looking at rather than sitting on. Marcus took off his jacket, folded it carefully, and set it on the armrest. Slipped off his shoes and lined them up next to the couch with the precision he brought to everything. The same way he organized Iris's lunch, the same way he arranged their small apartment, so everything had a place. Then he lay down on his back, hands folded on his chest, staring at the ceiling. Rain tapped against the windows. The city glowed beyond the glass, alive and indifferent, 10,000 lives being lived in 10,000 lit windows, none of them aware of Marcus Wade lying on a cold couch, wondering if he'd just made the worst decision of his life. He thought about Iris asleep in their apartment, about Mrs. Harper in the next unit probably reading one of her mystery novels, ear half-tuned for sounds from Iris's room, about their routine tomorrow, Saturday morning, pancakes, homework review, maybe the park if the rain stopped, about the promise he'd made to his daughter the day her mother walked out without explanation or forwarding address. I will always show up. I will never leave you wondering where I am or whether I care. Love isn't something you say. It's something you do over and over, even when it's hard. Marcus fell asleep on that cold white couch, thinking about his daughter and hoping she was dreaming something beautiful, not knowing that when he woke up in a few hours, every careful choice he'd made would mean nothing against the machinery of assumption and optics and the reflexive defensiveness of people with power to protect. He woke to gray light and stiff muscles and 3 seconds of disorientation before memory assembled itself. Victoria's apartment, the couch, the promise. He checked his phone, 6:47, Saturday morning. 2 missed calls from Mrs. Harper. A text, Iris asking where you are. Everything okay? He typed back quickly. On my way home soon. Tell Iris I love her. Movement behind him. Marcus sat up, ran a hand through his hair, trying to look presentable and failing. Victoria appeared from the bedroom hallway, wearing his dress shirt, the one he'd draped over a chair, buttoned wrong, hanging to mid-thigh, her hair loose and her feet still bare. She looked at him with an expression he couldn't read, confusion shading towards something sharper. What are you doing here? The question came out accusatory, like he'd broken in rather than been asked to stay. Marcus stood up, trying to position himself in a way that looked non-threatening. You asked me to stay. I slept on the couch. Victoria's face went through a series of expressions, confusion, trying to remember, failing to remember clearly. She shook her head, the motion making her wince. Did we? Marcus raised his hands, palm out, the universal gesture of innocence or surrender or both. No, you asked me not to leave. I stayed out here, that's all. She stared at him, and he could see her trying to piece together a night she only half remembered. The gala, the car ride, getting home. Everything after that was probably fragments and gaps, the way alcohol erased memory, even when you weren't blackout drunk. She was assembling a story from insufficient evidence. And from where she stood, wearing his shirt, him in her apartment, morning light making everything look different than it had felt in the dark, The story she was building probably didn't match the reality. Then her gaze shifted past him to the kitchen island, to the laptop sitting there open. The screen showed a grid of faces frozen in various expressions. The red recording light still glowed. Victoria's face drained of color. She moved toward the laptop, each step careful, and Marcus saw the exact moment she understood. The laptop. Her morning executive leadership meeting. She'd left it running. The call had started at 6:30. Marcus had been visible in the background when she'd emerged from the bedroom wearing his shirt. The executive CFO, Kevin Morrison, VP of Operations, Sharon Mitchell, General Counsel, Gerald Parker, VP of Finance, Richard Brennan, and 8 others, whose names Marcus didn't know, had seen everything, had been watching when she'd asked her question. Victoria turned back to Marcus, and the fear in her eyes was transforming into something else. Panic. The kind that overrides logic and good sense. Her voice came out, too loud, pitched wrong. "Did you touch me last night?" The question hit Marcus like a physical blow. Not because of the words themselves, but because of who was listening. The laptop was still transmitting. The executives could hear every word. And from their perspective, sitting in their own homes or offices watching this unfold on their screens, the optics were damning. CEO in disarray, male employee present overnight, her asking if he'd touched her. His denial, no matter how genuine, would sound exactly like what a guilty person would say. Marcus's hands were still up, as if that could somehow stop what was happening. "No, I was on the couch all night. Victoria, I was just helping." "Then why are you here? Why am I—" She gestured at herself, at his shirt, at the bedroom door standing open. "You asked me to stay. You were scared. I didn't touch you. I swear." But it didn't matter what he said. The damage was done. On 12 screens across the Seattle metro area, executives were watching and hearing and making instant calculations about liability and optics and what this meant for the company. They were seeing a scene that looked like exactly what everyone feared it looked like, and no amount of explanation would undo that first impression. Victoria's hand slammed down on the trackpad. The call ended with a soft chime that sounded obscenely cheerful given what had just happened. Silence fell over the apartment like snow, muffling everything. They stood there, Marcus and Victoria. 2 people who'd existed in their respective lanes for 3 years without incident, now staring at each other across a chasm that had opened in seconds. "You need to leave." Her voice had gone cold professional, the CEO returning even though she was still wearing his shirt. "The security footage will show. Leave now." Marcus didn't argue, didn't try to explain again. He grabbed his jacket and shoes and left, taking the elevator down alone, walking past a doorman who suddenly found the marble floor fascinating, stepping out into Saturday morning drizzle that felt appropriate for the disaster unfolding around him. He got in the company car, hands shaking badly enough that it took 3 tries to get the key in the ignition. Sat there with the engine running, trying to process what had just happened, trying to understand how helping someone had transformed into whatever this was going to become. His phone buzzed. Text from Deshaun Bro. "Check your work email. Right now." Marcus opened the email app with fingers that felt numb. From Patricia Monroe, Director of Human Resources, subject: immediate suspension. Pending investigation. Effective immediately, you are suspended without pay, pending investigation into allegations of professional misconduct. You are not to contact any Hayes Technologies employees, enter company property, or discuss this matter on social media or with outside parties. A formal hearing will be scheduled within 10 business days, excluding weekends. Failure to comply with these terms may result in immediate termination. Marcus read it 3 times. Each time the words stayed the same. Suspended without pay. Do not contact employees. 10 business days. He opened his banking app, $680.23. Rent was due October 1st, 17 days away, $1,575. Iris's school lunch account had $40 left. Car insurance was due in 5 days. Groceries might stretch 2 weeks if he was careful. Iris's health insurance came through his job, which meant if they fired him, she'd be uninsured, right? When cold and flu season was starting. His vision narrowed, breath going shallow. Old paramedic training kicked in. Breathe 4 counts. Hold, breathe out 4 counts. Get control. He couldn't afford to panic. Iris needed him functional. The phone rang. Iris's school. He answered on the first ring, a voice almost steady. Mr. Wade, this is Nurse Morrison. Iris has a fever 102.1. We need you to come get her. I'm on my way. He drove to the school, still in the company car, breaking speed limits. He couldn't afford to brake, but not caring because his daughter needed him, and that was the only calculation that mattered. Pulled into the pickup circle at 10:30, signed Iris out, found her in the nurse's office, lying on a cot with flushed cheeks and her stuffed giraffe clutched against her chest like armor. She looked so small. 7 years old, 60 pounds, soaking wet curls damp with fever sweat. When she saw him, her face crumpled with relief. "Daddy?" The word came out weak and small, and it broke something in Marcus's chest that had been holding together through sheer force of will. He crossed the room in 3 strides, pressed his palm to her forehead, burning up hotter than it should be, and scooped her into his arms. "I've got you, kiddo. We're going home." Back at the apartment, he set Iris up on the couch with pillows and her weighted blanket, the one she'd had since she was 4. Took her temperature, 101.8 degree F. Gave her children's Tylenol with water and saltines because she needed something in her stomach. Wet a washcloth with cool water and laid it across her forehead. She was half asleep, but her eyes tracked him with that serious expression she got when she was trying to understand something bigger than herself. "Why did you take so long to get me?" The question landed like an accusation, even though she didn't mean it that way. Marcus sat on the edge of the couch and brushed her curls away from her face. "I'm sorry, baby. Work stuff, grown-up stuff. It was complicated. You look sad." He tried to smile, but it came out wrong, more grimace than reassurance. "Just worried about you." Iris's hand found his and held on with the grip of someone who knew on some level that things were wrong, even if she didn't understand how or why. "You always say we don't let go of people when it gets hard." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He'd said that to her 100 times usually when she was scared about making friends or worried about him leaving for work. It was the promise that held their whole life together. "We don't let go. When things are hard, when things are scary, we stay. We don't abandon people." "That's right. So your work people won't let go of you, right? You helped someone." Marcus looked at his daughter's flushed face, her fever-bright eyes, and felt the weight of every promise he'd ever made to her pressing down on his chest. He couldn't lie to her. He'd built their entire relationship on honesty, on being someone she could trust absolutely. But he also couldn't tell her that the people at his work had already let go, had cut him loose without asking his side of the story, that doing the right thing had somehow become evidence against him. "I'm going to fight for the truth. That's what I can promise." Iris nodded like this made perfect sense, then closed her eyes and drifted into the restless half-sleep of fever. Marcus sat beside her and pulled out his phone. 17 text messages from numbers he didn't recognize. Against his better judgment, he opened them. "Did you really sleep with the CEO? Heard you got caught. Bro, that's wild. My cousin works there, said you assaulted her." The messages kept coming, a mix of congratulation and condemnation, people treating his life like entertainment or gossip or proof of whatever narrative they wanted to believe about the world. Marcus flipped the phone face down on the coffee table and pressed his palms against his eyes. The worst part wasn't the suspension or the money or even the accusation. The worst part was knowing that somewhere out there, a story was being written about him without his input. And by the time anyone asked him what actually happened, the story would already be set in concrete. Over the next 48 hours, while Iris's fever broke and came back and broke again, while Marcus measured out Tylenol every 4 hours and watched her sleep with the vigilance of someone who'd already lost too much, the rumors evolved and spread like infection. His phone kept buzzing with messages from people he barely knew. His social media filled up with friend requests from strangers who wanted a front row seat to the drama. Someone created a hashtag. Someone else made a meme. His face pulled from the company directory showed up on a local gossip site with a headline that made him physically ill. Hayes Technologies driver accused of misconduct with CEO power imbalance or exploitation. The article didn't name him directly, but it didn't have to. Everyone who worked at Hayes Technologies knew. Everyone who'd seen that video call knew. The comments section was a war zone of people who'd never met him, deciding whether he was a predator or a victim, whether Victoria was lying or confused, whether the whole thing was a setup or a scandal or proof that the system was broken. Marcus read 3 comments before he had to close the browser. If genders were reversed, everyone would be screaming, hashtag me too. He knew exactly what he was doing. Gold digger. Rich woman can't handle her liquor, blames the help. Classic. He focused on Iris instead, made her soup she could keep down, read her favorite books in the voices she liked, sat beside her while she slept, watching the rise and fall of her small chest, reminding himself that this was what mattered. Not the opinions of strangers, not the job that had cut him loose. Just this. Just her. On Sunday evening, Iris's fever broke for good. She woke up clear-headed and hungry, demanding the pancakes they hadn't made Saturday morning. Marcus made them standing at the stove while she sat at the table wrapped in blankets, like a small burrito, chattering about her classmates and the science project due next Friday and whether they could go to the park when she was better. Dad, why hasn't Uncle Deshaun picked us up lately? The question made Marcus pause mid-flip. She called Deshaun uncle even though they weren't related, had since she was 4, and Deshaun had shown her how to tie her shoes using the bunny ears method. What do you mean? Mrs. Harper said he called to check on you. She said you were in trouble at work. Marcus set down the spatula and turned to face her. She was watching him with those eyes that saw too much, understood too much for 7 years old. It's complicated, but I didn't do anything wrong. Iris nodded matter of fact like this was obvious, and she'd never doubted it. I know. You don't do wrong things. The absolute certainty in her voice made something crack in his chest. She believed in him. Completely. Without reservation. And he had to find a way to prove that her belief wasn't misplaced, that the world wasn't as cruel and arbitrary as it was starting to seem. Monday morning brought an email from Patricia Monroe. Marcus opened it with the kind of dread that came from knowing the answer before asking the question. Mr. Wade, your request for security footage review has been noted and will be included in the investigation process. Your hearing is scheduled for Tuesday, September 26th at 10:00 a.m. in conference room 12A. You may bring a representative if you choose. Please confirm your attendance. Marcus counted on his fingers. Today was Monday the 16th. The hearing was the 26th. 10 business days exactly as a suspension email had said. He confirmed attendance in 2 sentences, then researched employment lawyers. Retainer fees started at $5,000. His bank account held $680. He couldn't afford representation, which meant he'd be walking into that room alone against HR and legal and whatever narrative they'd already constructed. Deshaun called that afternoon, voice careful. 10 business days. You got a plan? I requested the security footage. It'll prove everything. Silence on the other end, the kind that meant Deshaun was choosing his words. Marcus, brother, you think they're actually going to look at it? It's evidence. They have to. Evidence only matters if people want to see it. These folks, they already decided what's convenient for them and what protects the company. You think they care about what actually happened? Marcus wanted to argue, to insist that truth mattered and systems worked and justice wasn't just for people with lawyers and power. But Deshaun had 8 years at Hayes Technologies to Marcus's 3. He'd seen more, understood more about how things actually worked versus how they were supposed to work. Then what do I do? You tell the truth and hope someone's listening, and you call me if you need money. I'm serious. Kayla and I can help. After the call ended, Marcus sat at their small kitchen table and made a list on a legal pad. Evidence in my favor. Security footage shows I never entered bedroom. Timeline proves I was professional throughout. No physical evidence of misconduct. Victoria called me. I didn't pursue her. He stared at the list, trying to believe it was enough. Trying to convince himself that facts mattered more than optics and that doing the right thing wasn't about to cost him everything. Iris brought him another drawing. This one showed 2 stick figures holding hands, a heart drawn between them. The caption in her careful 7-year-old handwriting, "Real people don't give up." You taught me that, Dad. Marcus looked at the drawing, at his daughter's absolute faith that the lessons he taught her about how the world worked were actually true. He taped it to the refrigerator next to the butterfly drawing and the superhero drawing, 3 pieces of art that together formed a narrative about who Iris believed her father to be, someone who helped, someone who changed, someone who didn't quit when things got hard. The hearing was in 10 business days. Rent was due in 15. He had $680 and a promise to keep to the person who mattered most. But Marcus Wade had the truth on his side and security footage that would prove it. And the absolute certainty that walking away from Victoria that night would have meant teaching Iris that protecting yourself was more important than protecting others. If that wasn't enough to save him, then at least she'd know he'd fought for something real. The week before the hearing unfolded in a series of small humiliations that accumulated like interest on debt. Tuesday morning, Marcus stood in the cereal aisle at Safeway Calculator app open on his phone, adding prices to make sure he stayed under $40. The math was simple and brutal, generic brand, everything, no fruit except bananas, chicken thighs instead of breast pasta for 3 dinners instead of 2. He'd gotten good at stretching food, at making poverty look like careful meal planning. At the register, the total came to $38.50. The cashier, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes, looked at his cart, then at his face, and something in her expression suggested she'd done the same calculation herself more than once. Wednesday, Iris's friend Sophie's mother called. The conversation started friendly enough, asking how Iris was feeling, whether the fever had fully broken. Then came the shift, the throat clearing that preceded bad news delivered with false regret. I think maybe we should postpone the playdate we had scheduled, just until things settle down with your situation. Marcus gripped the phone tighter. Sophie and Iris had been friends since kindergarten. They traded snacks at lunch and drew pictures for each other and had that easy companionship that came from 2 years of daily proximity. My situation is a misunderstanding that's being investigated. It has nothing to do with Iris. I'm sure you're right. I just think for now, maybe it's better if we wait. You understand? He didn't understand. Or rather, he understood perfectly. Sophie's mother was protecting her daughter from association with scandal, treating Marcus like he was radioactive. It didn't matter that he'd done nothing wrong. The accusation itself was contamination. After he hung up, Iris appeared in the doorway, still in pajamas, even though it was 3 in the afternoon. She'd been home from school all week recovering, and the extended time together had made her perceptive in ways that worried him. Was that Sophie's mom? Yeah, kiddo. Are we still having the playdate Saturday? Marcus crouched down to her level, preparing to deliver the kind of disappointment that shouldn't matter to 7-year-olds, but somehow mattered more than adult disappointments because kids hadn't yet learned to armor themselves against them. Mrs. Patterson thinks maybe we should wait a few weeks until I'm back at work properly. Iris processed this with the seriousness she brought to everything. Her face didn't crumple. She just nodded, accepting it the way she'd accepted her mother leaving, with a composure that suggested she'd already learned not to expect much from the world. Did I do something wrong? The question gutted him. She was internalizing other people's judgments, translating their fear into personal failure. This was how damage happened, not through single traumatic events, but through accumulating messages that taught children they were somehow less worthy than others. You didn't do anything wrong. Sometimes adults make decisions that don't make sense. That's on them, not you. Thursday brought the realization that someone was watching. Marcus noticed it first on his morning walk to the corner store, a dark blue sedan parked across the street, engine running, windows tinted. He walked past, made his purchase, returned 20 minutes later. The sedan was still there. When he looked directly at it, the engine started and it pulled away slowly, deliberately, like whoever was inside wanted him to know he'd been observed. Friday evening, the same car appeared 2 blocks from their apartment. Marcus stood at the window watching it idle under a streetlight and felt the crawl of unease that came from being surveilled. He called Deshawn, described the vehicle. You think company security or someone hired by legal to build a case, document his movements, see if he does anything they can use against him. That's legal. You're not an employee anymore. You're a suspended contractor under investigation. Different rules. Marcus let the curtain fall back into place. The paranoia was probably warranted. If Hayes Technologies wanted to protect themselves, the best defense was offense. Build a counter-narrative, find any evidence of instability or poor judgment, make him look like someone who couldn't be trusted. He checked his bank account for the 4th time that day, $512. Rent was due in 9 days. He'd paid the car insurance and bought groceries, and now he was watching his margin of survival shrink to nothing. Deshawn had offered money a loan he'd called it, though both of them knew Marcus probably couldn't pay it back anytime soon. Pride said refuse. Practicality said accept. The decision loomed like a confession of failure. Saturday morning, Marcus sat at the kitchen table while Iris ate cereal and worked on homework she'd missed during her sick days. The worksheet was about community helpers, firefighters, teachers, doctors. There was a blank space where students were supposed to draw their own parents' job. Iris had drawn a car and a stick figure in a suit. She looked up from the paper, chewing her bottom lip in concentration. Dad, what do I put if you're not working right now? Put that I'm a driver. That's still what I do. But you're not driving. I will be again soon, after the hearing on Tuesday. She accepted this with the faith she still had in him, the belief that adults could fix things through sheer determination. Marcus wished he had that same certainty. That afternoon, Deshawn stopped by with groceries, a gesture disguised as cleaning out his pantry, but Marcus saw through it immediately. Canned goods, pasta rice, peanut butter, bread, milk. Enough to get them through another week without Marcus having to choose between food and keeping the lights on. Kayla's on a health kick. Says we need to eat fresh vegetables instead of canned. You'd be doing me a favor taking this stuff. The lie was transparent and kind. Marcus accepted it because refusing would have been pride at Iris's expense, and he'd learned a long time ago that pride was expensive. Thank you. Deshawn set the bags on the counter, then turned and looked at Marcus with an expression that held more weight than the casual visit suggested. Hearings Tuesday morning. You ready? I've got my statement prepared. I requested the footage. It's all their evidence that nothing happened. And if they don't care about evidence? The question hung in the small kitchen, honest and brutal. Marcus had been avoiding it, constructing a version of Tuesday's hearing where truth won simply by being true. But Deshawn was forcing him to consider the alternative, that the hearing was theater, that the decision had already been made, that all the evidence in the world wouldn't matter if the company had decided protecting Victoria's reputation was worth sacrificing him. Then I go public, contact a lawyer, talk to reporters, something. You got money for a lawyer? No, but I've got the truth. Deshawn's expression said everything. He was too kind to speak aloud. Truth without resources was just noise. In his 8 years at Hayes Technologies, he'd watched plenty of employees get ground up by systems designed to protect the institution rather than individuals. Good people, honest people, people who'd done nothing wrong except be in the wrong place when someone with power needed a scapegoat. You call me if you need anything. I mean that. After he left, Marcus put away the groceries and felt the strange mixture of gratitude and humiliation that came from accepting a charity. He was 38 years old with a bachelor's degree and a decade of work experience, and he was surviving on handouts from friends while his daughter learned that adults sometimes couldn't keep their promises. While Marcus was learning the specific weight of financial desperation, Victoria Hayes was discovering what guilt felt like when it had nowhere to hide. Saturday afternoon, alone in her penthouse, she sat at the kitchen island with her laptop open to the frozen frame from that morning's video call. Marcus's face, hands raised in that universal gesture of innocence, voice saying words she could barely remember hearing. Through the fog of panic and hangover, I was on the couch. Nothing happened. She'd reviewed the building's security footage 6 times now. The parking garage showing Marcus helping her from the car at 10:15 Friday night. The lobby where he'd caught her elbow when she stumbled. The elevator where she'd stood with eyes closed while he'd maintained careful distance in the corner. The hallway where he'd walked beside her without touching, stopping at her door. No footage inside the apartment, but the exit recording was clear. Marcus leaving alone at 7:15 Saturday morning, taking the elevator down, walking to his car with the posture of someone who knew he'd just made a terrible mistake, but couldn't identify what it was. He'd told the truth, every word. He'd slept on the couch. He'd maintained boundaries. He'd helped someone who needed help and asked nothing in return. And she'd repaid him with a question that had destroyed his livelihood because she'd been too panicked and confused to think clearly about what had actually happened. Her phone rang. Gerald Parker, the general counsel she'd known since she was 23, and he'd been her father's most trusted advisor. His voice carried the careful neutrality of someone delivering news that wouldn't be received well. Victoria, the board wants to discuss the situation before the hearing. The security footage shows he did nothing wrong. It shows he spent the night in your home. That's the issue. He was helping me. I asked him to stay. Gerald's pause was eloquent. In that silence lived his judgment of her choices, his assessment of the situation, his calculation of how this played politically within the company's power structure. Optics Victoria, the executive team saw you in his shirt, asking if he touched you. Even if nothing happened, and I believe you that nothing happened, the appearance is damaging. To you, to the company, to our ability to claim we maintain appropriate boundaries. So we destroy an innocent employee to protect appearance. We protect the company. That's our responsibility. That's what your father would have. Don't. Her voice came out sharper than intended. Don't tell me what my father would have done. You know exactly what happened to him when this company chose optics over truth. The silence on the other end was different now, uncomfortable with recognition. 2 years ago, David Hayes had been accused of harassment by a board member's assistant. The accusation had been false, thoroughly investigated and dismissed, but the board had pressured him to settle quietly anyway, to pay out money and sign an NDA that would forever leave the question unresolved in public perception. He'd refused. The stress of fighting it, of watching people he'd trusted for decades turn on him to protect the institution, had broken something in him that no amount of eventual exoneration could repair. 3 weeks before the final report clearing his name was released, he'd walked into his garage, closed the door, started the car, and ended the question permanently. Victoria still had the suicide note in her desk drawer. 3 sentences: I won't live in a world that values reputation over truth. I'm sorry I wasn't strong enough to keep fighting. Tell Tori I love her and I'm proud of the woman she's becoming. I want Marcus Wade to have a fair process. I want that footage shown at the hearing, non-negotiable. Of course, we're conducting a thorough investigation. Gerald, I'm serious. He doesn't have a lawyer. He doesn't have resources. He has the trust, and this company is going to acknowledge it. The truth is complicated here. He showed poor judgment in staying overnight. That's not misconduct, but it's not nothing. She wanted to argue, to point out that the only poor judgment had been hers in drinking too much and asking him to stay and handling the morning with panic rather than clarity. But Gerald had already moved into lawyer mode, protecting the institution from liability, and nothing she said would penetrate that armor. After the call, Victoria opened her email and started typing. To the entire company, a full explanation of what had happened, an acceptance of responsibility, a public clearing of Marcus's name. Her finger hovered over the send button while she imagined the consequences. The board would be furious. Her authority would be questioned. The narrative of the strong female CEO would shift to something more complicated and harder to control. She closed the laptop without sending. Coward, her father's voice whispered in her memory, tell the truth and let them deal with it. But she wasn't her father. She'd watched what standing on principle had cost him, and she'd spent 2 years building walls specifically designed to prevent that same destruction from reaching her. Opening herself up now, admitting vulnerability, confessing that she'd needed help and hadn't handled it well, that felt like handing her enemies a weapon they'd been waiting for. Monday afternoon, she called Patricia Monroe directly. The security footage needs to be included in the hearing. I want Marcus Wade to see it. I want the panel to see it. Patricia's voice carried the careful distance of someone who knew this conversation was probably being recorded. We're reviewing all available evidence as part of our standard investigation protocol. Patricia, I'm not asking. I'm telling you. That footage proves he acted professionally. If the panel doesn't see it, I'll know why, and I won't forget. The process will be fair. You have my word. But Victoria had learned that words were cheap when institutions felt threatened. Fair meant whatever protected the company first and individuals second. Justice was negotiable. Truth was flexible. And Marcus Wade was about to walk into a room where 3 people with law degrees and corporate backing would decide his fate based on calculations that had nothing to do with what actually happened. She spent Monday evening drafting another email, this one just to Patricia, documenting everything. The drinking at the gala because it was the anniversary of her father's death and she'd needed something to dull the pain. The call to Marcus because she trusted him and hadn't wanted security or assistants who would report back to the board. His professionalism throughout. Her panic and confusion the next morning. The video call disaster that was entirely her fault. She read it 3 times, edited it twice, then saved it as a draft without sending. Evidence for later if needed, ammunition if the hearing went sideways. An insurance policy that felt inadequate, but better than nothing. Tuesday morning arrived cold and gray. Seattle wrapped in the kind of rain that felt less like weather and more like judgment. Marcus dropped Iris at school with a hug that lasted long enough for her to squirm and ask if he was okay. He told her he was, which was only half a lie. He was upright, functional, present. That would have to be enough. The Hayes Technologies campus sat on the edge of Lake Union, all glass and steel and architectural ambition, designed to make people feel either inspired or inadequate, depending on which side of the power structure they occupied. Marcus had driven past it 1,000 times parked in its garage every workday for 3 years, but walking through the front entrance as a suspended employee felt different, exposed, visible in a way he'd never been before when the uniform had made him invisible. Security recognized him but didn't smile. The receptionist gave him a visitor badge even though he technically still worked there. The elevator ride to the 12th floor felt longer than physics allowed, the mirrored walls reflecting a version of himself. He barely recognized a man in a suit that fit wrong, trying to look like he deserved to be taken seriously. Conference room 12A sat at the end of a long hallway lined with abstract art that probably cost more than his car. Through the glass panel, he could see 3 people already seated arranged on one side of a long table, like judges at a trial. The door was closed. He stood outside for 10 seconds, gathering himself, knowing that what happened in the next hour would determine whether his daughter ate next month. He knocked once and entered. Patricia Monroe sat in the center, flanked by the 2 others. She was mid-40s, blonde hair pulled back so tight it looked painful wearing a blazer that probably cost what Marcus made in a month. Everything about her suggested precision and control, a woman who'd built a career on managing risk and protecting institutions from the messy humanity of their employees. To her left sat Gerald Parker, general counsel, a man in his 50s with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses that made him look both intelligent and dangerous. He wore authority like a well-tailored suit, comfortable and unquestioned, the kind of lawyer who'd never lost an argument because he knew how to redefine the terms until winning became inevitable. To Patricia's right was Dr. Margaret Foster, VP of Ethics and Compliance, younger than the other 2, sharp-eyed and watchful. She held a pen like a weapon and a legal pad covered in notes Marcus couldn't read from this distance. Across from them, on the other side of the table, sat a single empty chair positioned so that light from the windows hit it directly, while the 3 executives sat in relative shadow. The staging was deliberate, designed to create discomfort and emphasize the power differential. Patricia's voice was professionally neutral, the kind of careful tone used in depositions. Mr. Wade, thank you for coming. This hearing is part of our standard investigation process following allegations of professional misconduct. You are not required to have legal representation, but you have the right to request counsel before we proceed. Do you understand? I understand. Do you wish to have legal representation present? Marcus thought about the retainer fees he couldn't afford and the bank account balance that kept him awake at night. No. Patricia made a note, then folded her hands on the table in front of her with the patience of someone who'd conducted 100 of these hearings and knew exactly how they ended. On the morning of Saturday, September 14th, you were found in CEO Victoria Hayes' private residence at approximately 7 a.m. Hayes was partially undressed in your clothing. You had spent the night. Is this accurate? The phrasing made it sound sordid, deliberate, like he'd orchestrated the situation for personal gain. Marcus kept his voice level, refusing to let them see the anger building in his chest. I drove Miss Hayes home from the company gala Friday night because she called and requested a ride. She was intoxicated. I helped her inside her apartment to ensure she was safe. She asked me not to leave. I slept on her couch. That's what happened. Gerald leaned forward slightly, fingers steepled, watching Marcus with the detached curiosity of someone observing an experiment. And you didn't think to notify anyone's security, her assistant building staff. You simply decided to spend the night alone with the CEO in her private residence. She specifically asked for no security, no assistant, just me. She was vulnerable and scared. I didn't think leaving her alone in that condition was the right thing to do. Dr. Foster spoke for the first time, her voice measured and clinical. Mr. Wade, are you aware of the company policy regarding fraternization and appropriate boundaries between employees of different levels? Yes. And you don't believe that spending the night in the CEO's home violates those boundaries? I believe helping someone who was vulnerable and asked for help is a human response. I maintained appropriate boundaries the entire time. Gerald's voice carried the smooth danger of someone who'd found an opening. The problem, Mr. Wade, is that boundaries are defined not just by physical actions, but by perception and context. Even if nothing inappropriate occurred and we're not accusing you of assault, the appearance of impropriety can be just as damaging to the company's reputation and Ms. Hayes's position. Marcus stared at him, understanding, crystallizing with the cold clarity of recognition. This wasn't about what happened. This was about managing liability, protecting Victoria from gossip, making sure the company could point to decisive action if anyone questioned how they'd handled the situation. He was collateral damage in a calculation that had nothing to do with justice. So I'm being punished for how something looks rather than what actually happened. Patricia slid a paper across the table. Marcus recognized it as a printed email. We've received statements from 3 employees alleging that they witnessed inappropriate closeness between you and Ms. Hayes over the past several months. Prolonged conversations, familiarity that exceeded professional norms. Marcus felt his hands curl into fists under the table. He forced them flat, conscious of Dr. Foster's eyes, tracking the movement. That's not true. I barely spoke to Ms. Hayes before that night. 4 rides in 3 years. I was her driver, not her friend. Someone is lying. These are credible employees with no reason to fabricate such accounts. Then show me the statements. Let me see who's accusing me and what they claim they saw. Patricia's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind her eyes. Discomfort maybe, or the recognition that he'd asked a question they couldn't easily answer without revealing the weakness of their case. That's not standard procedure during initial hearings. Marcus leaned forward, abandoning the careful politeness he had been maintaining. You suspended me without pay based on accusations you won't let me see from people you won't name. You're talking about professional misconduct without showing me any evidence except optics. I requested security footage. Did you review it? The question hung in the air, sharp and specific. Patricia exchanged a glance with Gerald that lasted less than a second, but told Marcus everything he needed to know. They had reviewed it. The footage existed. And whatever it showed hadn't been enough to make this go away. Patricia's voice carried careful precision. We did review all available footage from the evening in question and the following morning. Relief flooded through Marcus so fast it made him dizzy. They'd looked. The evidence was there. The careful distance in the elevator, the professional boundaries, the morning departure, that proved exactly what he'd said. And another pause, this one longer. Dr. Foster wrote something on her legal pad that Marcus couldn't see. The footage corroborates your version of events. You drove Ms. Hayes home. You helped her inside. There is no evidence of physical misconduct. The words should have felt like vindication, like the moment when truth won simply by being true. But Patricia's tone suggested they weren't done, that corroboration wasn't the same as exoneration. Marcus's voice came out harder than he intended. Then why are we here? Gerald's response was surgical in its precision. Because the footage doesn't change the fact that you remained overnight in her residence. It doesn't change the optics of the situation. It doesn't undo the damage to Ms. Hayes' reputation when senior leadership saw you both on that video call. And it doesn't address the judgment you demonstrated in choosing to stay rather than calling for appropriate assistance. Marcus stared at them in disbelief, watching his future disintegrate even as the evidence proved his innocence. They were going to punish him anyway. Not for what he'd done, but for how it looked. Not for misconduct, but for poor judgment in helping someone who needed help. The footage proves I did nothing wrong, Durbaum. Foster's voice was quieter than the others, almost sympathetic, which somehow made it worse. It proves you didn't commit assault. It doesn't prove your judgment was sound. It doesn't address the appearance of impropriety or the complications this creates for Ms. Hayes' position as CEO. Patricia leaned forward with the patience of someone explaining simple concepts to a difficult child. Mr. Wade, you need to understand that we operate in a complex environment. Perception shapes reality in ways that affect stock prices, board confidence, employee morale. Even when nothing inappropriate occurs, the appearance can damage the company's standing and create liability we have to manage. Marcus pushed back from the table slightly, his chair scraping against the floor. The 3 executives went still, and he felt their surprise at the movement. Employees didn't push back, didn't show frustration, didn't challenge the narrative once it was established. You're going to punish me for doing the humane thing, for not leaving a vulnerable person alone, for keeping boundaries even when it would have been easier to walk away. His voice was shaking, but he didn't care any more about maintaining composure or playing the game by their rules. I have a daughter who's 7 years old. She asks me every day if people are good or if they are just pretending. I tell her that most people try to do the right thing even when it's hard. But you're teaching me that's a lie. You're teaching me that doing right doesn't matter if it's inconvenient for people with power. Patricia's voice sharpened. Mr. Wade, I'd advise you to. Did any of you ask me what happened before you suspended me? Did anyone call and say, hey, we saw something strange, can you explain? Or did you just decide that protecting the company was more important than protecting the truth? The silence that followed felt like an answer. They hadn't asked. They'd seen the video call, made assumptions, and moved to contain the situation before it could spread. He'd been guilty from the moment Victoria asked her question, and everything after that was just process designed to look like fairness while reaching a predetermined conclusion. Gerald's voice carried warning. Mr. Wade, sit down. Marcus didn't sit. He looked at each of them in turn, seeing not people, but positions, not individuals, but representatives of a system designed to protect itself at any cost. Your procedures almost destroyed my life. I've got $500 in the bank and rent due in 9 days and a daughter who needs health insurance. You're sitting here telling me that even though the evidence proves I did nothing wrong, you're still going to punish me because of optics. Dr. Foster's voice tried for conciliatory. Mr. Wade, we haven't made a final determination. This hearing is part of the process. We're gathering information to make an informed decision. Marcus turned toward the door, exhausted and furious, and ready to walk away from all of it. The process. Right. He started to turn when the conference room door opened behind him. Victoria Hayes stood in the doorway. She looked different than she had Saturday morning, composed professional hair, pulled back wearing a navy suit and low heels. But her eyes held something raw and unguarded that made everyone in the room go instantly still. This hearing is over. Patricia stood quickly, professional mask cracking slightly. Ms. Hayes, this is standard procedure for allegations of... Victoria walked in and closed the door with a soft click that somehow sounded louder than a slam. I said it's over. She moved to the table and dropped a folder onto the glass surface with a soft thump that felt final. I watched the footage, all of it. Garage cameras, lobby security, elevator, hallway. Every angle. Marcus Wade acted professionally and appropriately. He helped me when I needed help. He maintained boundaries. He slept on a couch. She looked at each executive in turn, with an intensity that Marcus had only seen from a distance, never directed at people she was about to dismantle. And the next morning I accused him in front of a dozen executives because I was confused and scared and trained to protect myself first and ask questions later. If anyone should be ashamed right now, it's me. And it's this process that nearly destroyed an innocent employee because protecting institutional reputation was more important than protecting the truth. Gerald began carefully, voice carrying legal caution. Ms. Hayes, there are complexities here that require... Victoria's voice cut through his like a blade. He returns to work immediately. Full back pay for the suspension period. And anyone who retaliates against him in any form, anyone who spreads rumors or makes his work environment hostile, will be terminated. Are we clear? Patricia's face had gone pale, but she maintained composure. The board may have concerns about... Then the board can discuss those concerns with me directly, but this ends now. She turned to Marcus, and for the first time since entering the room, her expression softened into something that looked like genuine remorse. I owe you an apology. A real one, not a corporate one. Marcus stood frozen, trying to process the sudden reversal, the way power had just shifted in the room like a door swinging open on hinges he hadn't known existed. You don't have to. I do. You did the right thing and I repaid you with suspicion and accusations. I let my fear override my judgment. That's on me, not you. The room was so quiet Marcus could hear rain hitting the windows 12 floors below. Patricia cleared her throat carefully, already pivoting to implementation mode. We'll prepare the necessary reinstatement paperwork. Victoria's response was immediate and uncompromising. Today, it happens today. She looked at each executive again, making sure they understood this wasn't a request, wasn't open for negotiation. Then she turned back to Marcus. I'd like to speak with you privately, if you're willing. Patricia, Gerald, and Dr. Foster gathered their materials in silence and filed out of the conference room, leaving Marcus and Victoria alone with the rain-streaked windows and the truth hanging between them like something fragile and new. Victoria moved to the window back to Marcus, looking out at the gray city spread below. When she spoke, her voice carried none of the CEO authority she'd used with the panel. I spent 3 days reviewing that footage, frame by frame, looking for any moment where you crossed a line or took advantage. You never did. You were careful, respectful. You helped me and asked nothing in return. She turned to face him, and the vulnerability in her expression was almost painful to witness. This woman who ran a billion-dollar company, who commanded rooms full of powerful men, who just demolished an HR panel with 3 sentences, standing there looking lost. And I accused you of assault in front of the entire executive team because that's what this world has taught me to do. Protect yourself first. Trust no one. Assume the worst. Marcus felt his anger burning out, leaving something heavier in its place, understanding maybe, or just exhaustion. You were scared. I get that. That's not an excuse. No, but it's a reason. Victoria studied him with eyes that held desperate honesty, like she was trying to figure out if he was real or just exceptionally good at performing decency. Why did you stay that night? You could have called security, gotten building staff, left a note, and walked away. Any of those options would have protected you. Marcus thought about Iris's nightmares about sitting outside her door until her breathing went soft and even. About the promise he'd made to be the kind of person she could trust absolutely. About how explaining kindness always made it sound smaller than it actually was. You asked me not to leave. You were scared and vulnerable. I thought about what I want someone to do for my daughter if she needed help. So I stayed on the couch with boundaries because that felt like the human thing to do. Something cracked in Victoria's expression, and Marcus saw what it cost her to maintain control, to never admit weakness, to live in constant performance mode, where vulnerability meant defeat. I built my career on being untouchable, on never showing weakness, never giving anyone ammunition. And one night of letting my guard down nearly destroyed someone who did nothing but help me. She moved closer to the table, gripping its edge. I'm sorry for the accusation, for not defending you immediately, for letting the system eat you alive while I figured out how to protect my own reputation. You deserve better. Marcus absorbed the apology, feeling its weight, recognizing that for someone like Victoria, admitting fault publicly probably felt like stepping off a cliff. I just want my job back. I want to pick up my daughter from school and pay my rent and not have people whispering in hallways. You'll have it, all of it, and I'm going to make sure everyone knows the truth. She straightened, sliding back into CEO posture, but something in her eyes remained softer than before. I meant what I said in there. Anyone retaliates, they're gone. You have my word. Marcus believed her. He could see it in the set of her jaw, the way she held herself like someone who'd just drawn a line she had no intention of crossing back over. Thank you. Victoria nodded, then hesitated, and Marcus saw her make some internal decision. Mr. Wade Marcus, I have a question. Can we talk in my office? It's not about that night. It's about what happens next. 1 hour later, Marcus sat across from Victoria in her office, wondering if he'd fallen into some alternate reality where morning disasters transformed into afternoon opportunities. She'd offered him coffee, which he'd accepted, and now they sat in chairs positioned at angles rather than across her desk, deliberate staging that suggested conversation rather than hierarchy. Her office was minimalist but personal in ways her apartment hadn't been. Photos of an older man who must have been her father. Awards and framed patent documents. A view of Lake Union that probably cost more in monthly rent than Marcus made in a year. Victoria opened a folder and slid it across the small table between them. 3 years ago, my father was accused of sexual harassment by a board member's assistant. The accusation was false. Security footage and witness statements proved it. But the board pressured him to settle quietly anyway. Pay out money, sign an NDA, make it disappear for the good of the company. She looked at the photo of her father, and Marcus saw pain etched in her expression. He refused, said he wouldn't lie about something he didn't do, so they dragged it out. Investigation after investigation. Lawyers picking apart his life, the stress, the public scrutiny, the betrayal by people he'd trusted for decades. It broke him. 3 weeks before the final report clearing his name was released, he killed himself. Marcus stayed quiet, letting her finish, understanding now where the fear came from, why her first instinct had been to protect herself. I inherited this company with that shadow hanging over it, and I swore I'd never let fear or optics matter more than truth. But then I did exactly that to you. I became the system I hated. She slid a paper across the table toward him. I want to create a new position. Ethics and Employee Advocacy Consultant. 6-month contract initially with potential to convert to permanent. Your job would be to audit HR processes, review complaint procedures, interview employees about their experiences with our systems, and recommend changes. You'd report directly to me, not to HR or legal. Marcus stared at the paper, then at Victoria, trying to process the offer. Driver to consultant, working class to executive floor. The gulf between the positions was enormous, and everyone would know exactly why he'd been promoted. You want the driver you just suspended to audit your HR department. I want someone who understands what it feels like to be powerless in a system designed to protect power. Someone who did the right thing when it would have been easier to walk away. That's exactly who should be in this role. People will say I slept my way into it. They'll say you're paying me off to keep quiet about what happened. Victoria turned the laptop toward him, showing a detailed job description. Then we make it bulletproof. Written job description posted internally. Your qualifications include a bachelor's degree in criminal justice and 5 years as a paramedic, which means crisis management, ethical decision-making under pressure, and experience with vulnerable populations. You have lived experience with the exact systemic failures we're trying to fix. She opened another tab showing salary information, $75,000 annually plus benefits, nearly double what he'd been making as a driver. Health insurance for Iris, a retirement account, stability that felt almost imaginary after 10 days of financial terror. Marcus, I'm not trying to buy your silence or assuage my guilt. I'm trying to build something better. And I need someone who won't compromise when it's expensive. Marcus looked at the screen at the numbers that would change everything about his and Iris's life. Then he looked at Victoria, trying to read whether this was genuine or elaborate manipulation. I need to think about it. Take the week, but I'm serious about this. You showed me what integrity looks like under pressure. That's worth more than any credentials. He left her office an hour later with his job restored, back pay approved, and a decision to make that felt both like opportunity and trap. His phone buzzed with a text from Deshaun. Dude, what happened? Everyone's talking. Another text, this one from a number he didn't recognize. Mr. Wade, I saw the announcement about your reinstatement. I'm a former Hayes Technologies employee. 2 years ago, I filed a harassment complaint against Richard Brennan, VP of Finance. HR buried it. I left the company 6 weeks after reporting. If you actually care about fixing the system, prove it. Contact me. Jessica Brenner. Marcus stared at the message, understanding, crystallizing with uncomfortable clarity. Victoria wanted him to audit the system. Someone had just handed him evidence that the system was broken in ways Victoria might not even know. And if he took the consultant position, the first thing he'd have to do was investigate whether a senior executive had been protected from accountability. He thought about Iris's drawing on the refrigerator. Real people don't give up. He thought about the choice in front of him: go back to driving, keep his head down, collect his paycheck, and be grateful. Or step into something bigger and more dangerous, something that would make him visible in ways that could destroy him all over again. His phone buzzed again, Iris's school reminding him about pickup time. 3:15, the most important job he had. He closed the message from Jessica Brenner without responding, but he didn't delete it. Evidence. Ammunition. A problem for after he'd picked up his daughter and made her dinner and tucked her into bed and remembered for one evening what it felt like when the world wasn't trying to grind him into dust. Tuesday night, while Iris slept and Seattle rain tapped against their apartment windows, Marcus opened his laptop and replied to Jessica Brenner's message. I'm listening. Tell me everything. Marcus accepted Victoria's offer on Thursday morning after 3 days of weighing opportunity against risk. The decision came down to a simple calculation. Staying invisible meant staying safe. But Iris deserved a father who taught her that some things mattered more than safety. If the system was broken, and Jessica Brenner's message suggested it was broken in ways that hurt people, then someone had to fix it. Might as well be him. Monday, October 2nd, his first day as ethics and employee advocacy consultant started with an office that still smelled like fresh paint. Small but real window overlooking the lake. Door that closed desk computer phone with an extension that appeared in the company directory before lunch. A nameplate arrived at 2 p.m. black letters on brushed metal, Marcus Wade, ethics and employee advocacy consultant. Deshawn texted a photo of it. From fired to executive floor in 3 weeks. You're either blessed or cursed. Haven't decided which. Marcus replied, probably both. Victoria stopped by at 3 carrying a folder thick enough to suggest the scope of what she was asking him to take on. Patricia Monroe knows you're reviewing HR processes. She's not thrilled. I imagine not. You have full access to complaint files from the last 3 years. If you find problems, tell me directly. Don't filter it to make anyone comfortable. Even if it implicates senior people. Especially then. She set the folder on his desk and Marcus saw the edge of a spreadsheet showing complaint numbers, resolution rates, employee retention statistics. Numbers that would tell stories if he knew how to read them. One more thing, Jessica Brenner contacted you. It wasn't a question. Victoria had either been copied on the email or had access to company communications in ways Marcus hadn't considered. She did. I want you to investigate. Whatever you find, wherever it leads, follow it. Richard Brennan has been here 14 years. He reports to the CFO. He has relationships with half the board. If there's a problem, it's been protected by people with power, which means uncovering it will be expensive. For me or for you? Both, but mostly for you. I can survive scandal. You're building credibility from zero. One misstep and people will say I hired you to bury complaints, not surface them. The honesty was bracing. Victoria wasn't promising protection or guaranteed success. She was acknowledging that this job could destroy him as easily as save him and trusting him to do it anyway. After she left, Marcus opened the folder and started reading. 3 years of data organized by quarter, showing complaint, volume investigation, timelines, outcomes, and employee retention, post-resolution. The patterns emerged quickly for anyone looking. Complaints against managers averaged 6 weeks to resolve. Complaints against VPs or executives averaged 9 days. Employees who filed complaints left the company at a 68% rate within 6 months. The system was designed to protect the institution, not the individuals. Fast resolutions for executives meant cursory investigations. High turnover post-complaint meant the problem solved itself through attrition. Complainants left, executives stayed, and no one had to make hard decisions about power or accountability. Marcus made notes in a composition notebook, tracking patterns, identifying gaps, building the foundation of a case he didn't fully understand yet but could feel taking shape. By 5 p.m., he had enough to know the problem was systemic, built into the incentive structure, invisible to anyone who didn't want to see it. Patricia Monroe appeared at his door at 5:30, professional mask firmly in place. Marcus, can we talk? She sat across from him with the careful positioning of someone managing an uncomfortable conversation. Her blazer was different from Tuesday's hearing, but carried the same armor, like quality protection against messiness and emotion. I want you to understand something. I don't enjoy what happened to you. I don't enjoy any of this. But my job is to protect the company from liability. Sometimes that means making hard decisions quickly based on incomplete information. Even if those decisions aren't fair. Fair is subjective. Legal exposure is measurable. When you're in my position, you learn to manage risk rather than chase perfect justice. Marcus leaned forward slightly, testing the boundaries of this new dynamic, where he had some power, but she had seniority and institutional knowledge he lacked. I'm reviewing complaint files. I've found concerning patterns. Complaints against senior executives are resolved much faster than those against mid-level employees, often without thorough investigation. Patricia's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, the only sign that his observation had landed. Senior executives have more at stake. The company has more to lose if we mishandle sensitive situations involving leadership. What about the employees who file complaints? What do they have to lose? The silence stretched uncomfortably. Patricia broke eye contact first, looking at the notepad on his desk where his handwriting tracked complaint resolution disparities. Just remember, Marcus, systems exist for reasons. They're built over time by people who learned hard lessons. Be careful about tearing them down before you understand why they were constructed the way they were. She stood smoothing her blazer, reassembling the professional distance. I hope this works out for you, genuinely. But don't mistake Victoria's protection for immunity. If you make allegations you can't prove, or if you damage relationships that keep this company functioning, you'll find that being right isn't enough. After she left, Marcus sat in the growing darkness of his office city lights, beginning to glow across the lake. The warning had been clear. Stay in your lane, don't make waves, remember that institutional stability mattered more than individual justice. It was the same message delivered with politeness, the velvet glove around the iron fist. He texted Jessica Brenner, "Can we meet tomorrow? I need to hear everything." Her response came within minutes, Pioneer Square, 10th and Main. Coffee shop on the corner, 10 a.m. Wednesday morning arrived cold and sharp, October asserting itself with temperature drops that reminded Seattle residents winter was coming. Marcus met Jessica at a cafe that was generic enough to be forgettable neutral territory, where neither of them had history or association. She was 29, sharp-eyed, dressed in business casual, that suggested she'd landed somewhere stable after Hayes Technologies. When she sat across from him, she didn't order coffee, just got straight to business with the efficiency of someone who'd told this story before and didn't enjoy the repetition. 2 years ago, Richard Brennan was my indirect supervisor, VP of Finance. Everyone loved him, board connections, mentored half the senior staff. Company man through and through. She pulled out her phone, scrolled to screenshots she'd saved, turned the screen toward Marcus. It started friendly. Compliments on work, offers to grab coffee and discuss career development. Then escalated. Comments about my appearance, invitations to drinks after work, suggestions that we could work on projects together over dinner. The text messages she showed him were dated, time-stamped, preserved with the foresight of someone who knew they might need evidence. Brennan's number asking her to stop by his office when everyone else had gone home, commenting on how she looked in professional attire, inviting her to discuss her career trajectory over drinks at his place. I reported it to HR. Patricia Monroe interviewed him once. Case closed in 11 days with findings of allegations could not be substantiated. I transferred departments, took a pay cut to get away from finance. 6 weeks later, I quit. Marcus took notes, asking questions that his paramedic training had taught him, specific, factual, focused on what rather than why. What time did these interactions occur? How many witnesses were present? Were there other women who mentioned similar experiences? Did HR interview anyone else, coworkers who might have seen the interactions? No witnesses, no pattern analysis, no follow-up. Just we investigated, nothing to see here, case closed. And Richard Brennan, still VP of Finance, still mentoring young female employees, still untouchable because Charles Whitmore brought him into the company 14 years ago and considers him succession material for CFO. She leaned forward, voice dropping to something more intense. I'm telling you this because if Victoria Hayes actually wants to fix the system, this is where you start. Richard Brennan has been protected for years. And I know I'm not the only one who learned to stay quiet because speaking up just got you labeled difficult. You have names, other women who might talk to me. 3 I know personally. Sarah Bennett in marketing, Amanda Foster, who left last year, and someone in legal who won't come forward but confirmed the behavior when I asked. None of them filed complaints because they watched what happened to me. Marcus took the names, got contact information, and promised confidentiality to the extent his investigation allowed. After Jessica left, he sat in the coffee shop for another 20 minutes, staring at his notes, understanding that he'd just been handed a grenade. Investigating a VP protected by the board chairman wasn't auditing HR processes. It was declaring war on the power structure that kept the company running. He thought about walking away. Telling Victoria he'd looked into it couldn't substantiate the claims, recommending better documentation procedures for future complaints. The safe play that would let him keep his consultant position without making enemies who could destroy him. Then he thought about Iris's drawing, "Real people don't give up." And he thought about Patricia's warning systems exist for reasons. And he understood that sometimes the reason systems existed was to protect the wrong people, and the only way to fix that was to break them. Over the next 3 weeks, Marcus interviewed 6 women, 4 current employees, 2 former. The pattern was consistent enough to be damning. Richard Brennan targeted women under 30, always in departments he had influence over, always with the same progression from friendly to inappropriate to retaliatory when rebuffed. The retaliation was subtle project reassignments, performance reviews that suddenly dropped promotional opportunities that vanished without explanation. Nothing dramatic enough to be obviously connected, everything plausibly deniable as coincidence or legitimate business decisions. Sarah Bennett, 32 now but 28, when it happened, met him in her car during lunch break because she didn't want to be seen talking to him in the building. Her story matched Jessica's almost exactly, compliments that became comments about her body, suggestions of private dinners to discuss career advancement, messages sent late at night that had nothing to do with work. I never reported it. I watched what happened to Jessica and learned the lesson. Speaking up just marked you as someone who didn't understand how things worked. Amanda Foster, who'd left Hayes Technologies 18 months ago, agreed to meet only after Marcus promised her name wouldn't appear in any documentation without her explicit permission. She'd been 24 when Richard started pursuing her, too young and too new to the corporate world to recognize the manipulation for what it was. He made it seem like special attention, like he saw potential in me that others didn't. Then it shifted to touching hand on my lower back in the elevator, arm around my shoulders at company events. When I started avoiding him, my assignments dried up. 3 months later, I left. Marcus hired an external investigation firm on Victoria's approval, Connor and Associates employment law specialists who understood that internal investigations were compromised by institutional loyalty. Rachel Connor, the lead investigator, was 45, former prosecutor, and approached the case with the detachment necessary to build something that would hold up under legal scrutiny. Give me access to email records, expense reports, transfer requests, and performance reviews for anyone who worked under Brennan's oversight in the last 5 years. I'll find the pattern. What Rachel found was systematic. 9 women had received after-hours messages from Richard over 4 years. 7 women had transferred out of finance citing hostile work environment in exit interview notes that HR had buried in filing systems. 5 expense reports showed dinners with female employees, always one-on-one and always after 8 p.m., always categorized as mentoring sessions. The documentation painted a picture of someone who'd learned to operate just inside the boundaries of what could be proven, relying on institutional protection to shield him from consequence. The breaking point came when Marcus cross-referenced board meeting minutes and discovered Richard's relationship with Charles Whitmore. Not just professional mentoring, but personal friendship, golf outings, family dinners, vacation photos on social media that showed the two families intertwined. Richard wasn't just an executive. He was Whitmore's protege, his succession plan, his investment in the company's future leadership. Protecting Richard wasn't about one person's behavior. It was about protecting Whitmore's judgment, his legacy, his position as board chairman. Admitting Richard was a problem meant admitting Whitmore had enabled it for years. Marcus sat in Victoria's office on the afternoon of October 30th, 3 weeks into his investigation, with a file that had grown to 47 pages of documented patterns. We have a problem. Richard Brennan has abused his position for at least 4 years. Multiple victims, clear retaliation pattern, protected by his relationship with Charles Whitmore. If we move on this, we're not just confronting an executive. We're confronting the board chairman. Victoria stood at her window, the position she seemed to occupy whenever facing decisions that would cost something. When she turned back, her expression held the resolve of someone who'd already made the calculation. If we don't move, we're telling every employee that power protects abusers. What do you need? Authority to place him on leave immediately, access to his communications, permission to bring in external investigators, and protection for the witnesses who are finally willing to talk. Victoria reached for her phone. You have all of it. Start today. By Friday afternoon, Richard Brennan was on paid administrative leave. The investigation was formal and external, and the company's internal whisper network had exploded with speculation. Marcus received 7 anonymous texts from unknown numbers ranging from congratulations to threats. One message arriving at 4 p.m. was explicit enough to make his skin crawl. You just made powerful enemies. Watch yourself. The threat became reality. Saturday morning, when Marcus picked up Iris from school, she'd had a half day for teacher conferences, and the principal intercepted him in the hallway. Mr. Wade, I need to inform you of something concerning. We received a phone call this afternoon claiming to be from Child Protective Services asking questions about Iris's welfare and your fitness as a parent. Marcus's blood turned to ice water, every protective instinct screaming threat. What did they ask? Questions about her attendance, her demeanor, whether we'd observed any signs of neglect or instability. I verified the call with CPS directly. They have no open cases involving your family and didn't make any such call. Someone was impersonating CPS to investigate me through my daughter's school. The principal nodded, her expression carrying genuine concern rather than institutional caution. We've documented everything and increased our alert protocols. Any unusual calls or visitors regarding Iris will be flagged immediately. But I thought you should know someone is trying to intimidate you. Marcus thanked her with composure he didn't feel, then walked Iris to the car with his hand on her shoulder, scanning the parking lot for threats he couldn't identify but knew existed. In the car, Iris buckled herself in and looked at him with those two knowing eyes. Something's wrong. Just grown-up stuff, kiddo. Nothing for you to worry about. Are you in trouble again? The question hit him sideways. Again. Like the last month had taught her that trouble was his natural state, that normalcy was temporary, that security could vanish without warning. I'm helping fix things at work. Some people don't like that, but we're safe and I'm not going anywhere. She nodded, accepting his reassurance, even though her expression suggested she understood more than he wanted her to. At home, Marcus called Rachel Connor and reported the fake CPS call. That's witness intimidation. We need to document it with local police. This suggests whoever's protecting Richard is escalating. Or Richard himself is trying to scare me off. Either way, it means you're hitting a nerve. People are afraid of what you'll uncover. That makes them dangerous. Marcus filed a police report that evening, knowing it would accomplish nothing immediate but wanting the documentation on record. Then he sat at the kitchen table while Iris did homework and tried to calculate whether he'd made a terrible mistake. He had a consultant position that paid well a daughter to protect in enemies who just demonstrated they were willing to use her as leverage. Walking away would be smart, self-preserving, the rational choice that prioritized survival over principle. But walking away would also mean teaching Iris that courage was optional, that when power threatened you, the right response was submission. And Marcus had built his entire parenting philosophy on the opposite lesson. Sometimes you fight even when fighting is expensive, because the alternative is teaching your children that truth doesn't matter as much as safety. Monday, November 6th, the emergency board meeting convened at 9 a.m. in the top floor boardroom Marcus had never accessed before. The space was designed to intimidate floor-to-ceiling windows. Leather chairs, a table that could seat 20, but today held only 12. Charles Whitmore at the head, Victoria to his right, 8 other board members arranged along the sides, and at the far end, Richard Brennan with his attorney, a woman in an expensive suit who looked like she specialized in making problems disappear. Marcus sat to Victoria's left with Rachel Connor beside him, external investigator in legal armor against the institutional power arranged across the table. Gerald Parker was present too, general counsel, whose expression suggested he'd rather be anywhere else. Whitmore opened with the careful neutrality of someone managing a situation that had already gotten out of control. We're here to review the suspension of Richard Brennan and determine if the allegations warrant continued action or if this investigation has overreached appropriate bounds. Victoria's response was immediate and firm. Charles, the proper process is being followed by an independent investigator. The proper process would have been consulting the board before suspending a 14-year executive based on complaints that were previously investigated and resolved. Gerald, walk us through the allegations. Gerald stood uncomfortable in ways that suggested he'd seen the evidence and didn't like where this was heading. The allegations stem from complaints filed or informally reported by 6 current and former female employees regarding inappropriate conduct by Mr. Brennan spanning 4 years. The external investigation has documented patterns of behavior that raise concerns about workplace harassment and retaliation. Richard leaned forward, voice controlled but carrying an edge of wounded righteousness. Unsubstantiated allegations from disgruntled former employees who didn't advance as quickly as they wanted. I've mentored dozens of people in this company. Some have misinterpreted professional interest as something else. That doesn't make me a predator. Marcus's cue came from Victoria's slight nod. He stood connected his laptop to the presentation system, and the screen behind him lit up with the first slide. The allegations are substantiated. Over 4 years, 9 women received after-hours messages from Mr. Brennan. All were under 30, all were direct or indirect reports, all experienced the same escalation pattern: professional interest, personal attention, sexually explicit communication. He advanced to text message screenshots, anonymized but timestamped and verified. These messages show clear pro-aggression. From "you look at great in that presentation" to "we should grab drinks sometime, just us," to explicit comments about physical appearance and suggestions of career benefits tied to personal relationships. Richard's attorney interjected with practiced smoothness. "Context matters, Mr. Wade. Messages between adults can be misinterpreted. Friendly banter that seems inappropriate in retrospect doesn't constitute harassment. I have context." Marcus advanced to the next slide, showing email chains, transfer requests, performance reviews that told a story of retaliation. Woman 1 stopped responding to messages, performance review, dropped from "exceeds expectations" to "needs improvement," transferred out 3 months later. Woman 2 reported behavior to her manager, informally lost project assignments she was qualified for, left the company within 4 months. Woman 3 rejected dinner invitation overlooked for promotion she was clearly qualified for based on prior reviews. A board member, Dr. Ellen Travers, 62 tech veteran with steel gray hair, spoke up with skepticism that felt scripted. "Mr. Wade, these are serious allegations. Why did these women wait years to come forward? The timing seems convenient." They didn't wait. They watched what happened to Jessica Brenner 2 years ago. Marcus pulled up Jessica's case file, the 11-day investigation that concluded with "could not substantiate" her transfer and eventual departure. She filed a formal complaint. HR conducted a minimal investigation. The case was closed before witnesses could be interviewed, before any pattern analysis was conducted, before the system had time to determine if there was truth worth protecting. She learned what this company teaches people who speak up: staying quiet, it is safer than seeking justice. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Whitmore's expression hardened into something that stopped just short of hostility. "That's a serious accusation against our HR processes, and by extension, this board's oversight. It's an observation based on 3 years of data. Complaints against senior executives are resolved 70% faster than complaints against mid-level employees. Complainants leave the company at a 68% rate within 6 months. The system is designed to protect institutional reputation rather than individual employees." Richard's attorney stood voice smooth and dangerous. "Mr. Wade was recently accused of similar misconduct involving the CEO. Some might question whether his judgment in these matters is sufficiently objective given his own compromised position. The attack was strategic, designed to shift focus from Richard's behavior to Marcus's credibility." Whitmore leaned back, studying Marcus with calculation that suggested the same thought had occurred to him. "That's a fair point. Mr. Wade spent the night at Miss Hayes' residence under questionable circumstances. He was suspended for boundary violations. Now he's investigating another employee for related allegations. The appearance of bias is significant." Victoria's voice cut through with the edge Marcus had heard her use in the earlier hearing. "That's out of bounds, Charles. Security footage proved Marcus maintained appropriate boundaries. That situation was resolved. This meeting is about Richard Brennan's documented pattern of behavior, not about attacking the investigator's credibility." Richard's attorney pressed the advantage, pivoting to sympathy for her client. "My client has dedicated 14 years to this company. He's mentored dozens of employees, built relationships across departments, brought in 3 major clients last year. And now Mr. Wade, who has been in a consultant position for 1 month, is asking you to destroy his career based on complaints that may or may not accurately represent professional interactions that were misinterpreted." Marcus closed his laptop and looked around the table at faces that had already decided what was convenient to believe. "Let me be clear about something. This isn't personal. This is evidence. 6 witnesses with consistent stories, documented messages, a retaliation pattern that's visible to anyone willing to look. The only thing personal here is the relationship between Mr. Brennan and Chairman Whitmore, which is exactly why these cases get buried in the first place. Whitmore's jaw tightened, and Marcus knew he'd just crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Naming the conflict of interest, making explicit what everyone knew but nobody said, that Richard was protected not by innocence, but by friendship with power. Setting a precedent that employees can destroy executives based on allegations that can't be definitively proven is dangerous, Mr. Wade. It changes the balance of power in ways that make leadership positions untenable. Marcus heard what Whitmore wasn't saying. Directly protecting people like Richard was about more than just Richard. It was about maintaining a hierarchy where executives operated under different rules, where consequences were negotiable, where power insulated you from accountability. So we should protect the system instead of the people it's supposed to serve. We should be thoughtful about precedent and the long-term implications of reactive decisions. Marcus stood the decision, crystallizing with the cold clarity of someone who'd already lost too much to lose more by staying quiet. If that's who we are, then I resign. The words landed in the boardroom like a physical presence, impossible to ignore. Several board members exchanged glances. Richard's attorney's eyes narrowed with interest. Victoria went very still. Whitmore studied Marcus with renewed attention. You'd walk away from a position you've held for 1 month, from salary and benefits and the opportunity to affect change. Marcus thought about Iris asking if people who help others get punished for it. About the drawing that said real people don't give up, which she'd drawn before, understanding that sometimes giving up looked like holding to principle rather than position. My daughter is 7 years old. I won't teach her that doing the right thing is optional based on convenience or cost. If this board decides protecting executives is more important than protecting employees from abuse, I don't want to be part of that system. He gathered his laptop, the gesture deliberate and final. The evidence is clear. The pattern is documented. If you choose to ignore it, that's your decision. But it won't be mine, because I refuse to participate in teaching people that power matters more than truth. He walked toward the door, heart hammering, but hands steady, knowing he'd just sacrificed financial security for integrity and hoping it was worth the price. Victoria's voice stopped him at the threshold. Marcus, the board hasn't made a decision yet. He turned back, seeing something in her expression that might have been pride or recognition or fear of her own complicity if she let this play out wrong. Then make one, because every day Richard Brennan stays in his position while witnesses wait to see if telling the truth was worth the risk is another day we're teaching people this system doesn't actually protect anyone except those with power. The silence that followed felt eternal. Then Dr. Travers cleared her throat, breaking the standoff. Victoria's right. I've reviewed the evidence Gerald shared confidentially. This isn't ambiguous. Richard created hostile environment. We have documentation. If this becomes public and we didn't act, we're not just morally compromised, we're legally exposed. Another board member, James Crawford, 55, CFO from a different tech company, added his voice to the growing shift. Terminating a 14-year VP sends a message about instability and leadership. But not terminating him when we have clear evidence sends a worse message about our values. I've seen companies destroyed by ignoring problems because fixing them felt expensive. Gerald Parker, general counsel, who'd been carefully neutral, finally spoke with the weight of legal judgment. Charles, from a legal standpoint, we're exposed either way. But we're more exposed if we don't act, and this becomes a class action lawsuit or a media scandal. The documentation Rachel Connor compiled would be devastating in court. Whitmore looked around the table, reading the shifting dynamics, understanding that the coalition he'd counted on was fracturing. His protege, his investment, his succession plan, all of it crumbling because one consultant had refused to back down. Fine, we vote. All in favor of terminating Richard Brennan for cause. Marcus held his breath, watching hands rise. Dr. Travers first, then Crawford, then 3 others in quick succession. 6 votes. Whitmore himself voted against, along with 2 others who'd been Richard's strongest supporters. 6-3. Enough to end it. Richard Brennan is terminated for cause, effective immediately. Severance contingent on non-disparagement agreement and waiver of legal claims. Meeting adjourned. Victoria found Marcus in his office 20 minutes later as he sat in his chair staring at nothing, processing what had just happened. The victory that felt less like triumph and more like surviving a car accident, grateful to be alive, but shaken by how close it had been. Don't pack your things. I wasn't, just trying to believe we actually won. We won because you were willing to walk away, because you made it clear this wasn't negotiable. When you left that room, the calculation changed. Keeping Richard became more expensive than letting him go. She sat in the chair across from his desk, and for a moment the CEO mask slipped completely, showing exhaustion underneath. The board also approved your recommendations: centralized complaint reporting, external quarterly audits, written anti-retaliation policy with binding consequences. It's all in writing now, enforceable, trackable. You built something that will outlast you. Marcus felt the weight of what she was saying, understanding that the fight hadn't just been about Richard Brennan or 6 women who'd been hurt by someone with power. It had been about changing the structure itself, forcing the system to prioritize protection over convenience. What happens to the women who came forward? Jessica Brenner is being offered a settlement, full back pay from when she left, formal apology from the company, and if she wants to return, we'll create a position that fits her qualifications. The others are being offered protection guarantees in writing. Anyone who retaliates faces immediate termination, no exceptions. Victoria stood, smoothing her jacket, reassembling the professional armor she wore to face the world. Your consultant contract is being converted to permanent position. Associate Director of Employee Relations. Salary adjustment to $82,000. You've earned it. After she left, Marcus pulled out his phone and texted Deshawn. We won. Richard's gone. Systems changing. The response came immediately. You crazy bastard. You actually did it. Then another message, this one from a number Marcus didn't recognize. Thank you for not giving up. You made it possible for me to come back. Jessica Brenner. Monday morning, November 13th, the company-wide email arrived in 1,200 inboxes, simultaneously sent from Victoria Hayes with a subject line that guaranteed it would be read, addressing recent events and system changes. Marcus read it standing in his office, coffee cooling on his desk, understanding that Victoria had just done what his father had refused to do, admitted fault publicly, taken responsibility, and turned personal failure into institutional change. The email was direct in ways corporate communications rarely were. No euphemisms, no passive voice designed to deflect responsibility. Victoria explained what had happened with Richard Brennan, acknowledged that the company had failed to protect employees because protecting executives had been prioritized, and outlined the specific changes being implemented: centralized ethics reporting with external oversight, mandatory quarterly audits, written anti-retaliation policy with binding consequences, annual training for all managers on workplace conduct. The paragraph about Marcus made his throat tight. Marcus Wade, our Associate Director of Employee Relations, led the investigation that uncovered these systemic failures. His commitment to truth over convenience, even when it risked his own position, represents the kind of integrity we should demand from ourselves. If you've experienced harassment or retaliation and haven't felt safe reporting it, I encourage you to reach out to Marcus directly. Your voice matters. Your safety matters. We're not perfect, but we're committed to being better. His phone exploded with messages. Deshawn sent a screenshot of the email with 3 fire emojis. Several colleagues from the driver pool sent congratulations. 2 people from departments he'd never interacted with asked if they could schedule confidential conversations about workplace issues. And Jessica Brenner sent a message that said simply, "You changed it. The system actually works now." Marcus sat down at his desk and pulled out Iris's butterfly drawing from his bag, the one she'd made before any of this started, before she knew her father would have to transform in darkness before emerging capable of flight. He taped it to the wall beside his computer where he could see it every day, a reminder that change was possible, that courage mattered, that sometimes the scariest transformations led to the most important growth. 6 months later, on a Wednesday afternoon in late April, when spring had finally convinced Seattle winter was over, Marcus left work at 3 to pick up Iris from school. The new schedule allowed it. He'd restructured his role to maintain flexibility for the one job that actually mattered. Some things weren't negotiable. Their apartment was bigger now, 2 bedrooms in Greenwood, with a small backyard where Iris could play. The neighborhood was safer, the schools better, the neighbors friendly, in ways that suggested community rather than just proximity. Financial stability had changed everything about their daily existence. Grocery shopping without calculator, math saying yes to school field trips, without weighing cost against necessity, planning for Iris's future instead of just surviving her present. But more than the money or the title or the office with a view, what had changed was the space Marcus occupied in the world. He was visible now, not as someone to overlook, but as someone who mattered. Employees sought him out when they needed help. Victoria included him in leadership discussions. The system that had nearly destroyed him now listened when he spoke. At school pickup, Sophie's mother approached with the apologetic expression of someone who recognized their own cowardice and wanted to make amends without explicitly acknowledging the offense. The girls have been asking about scheduling that playdate. This Saturday, if Iris is available. Marcus accepted with grace that cost him nothing, because holding grudges was expensive, and he'd learned to invest his energy in building rather than punishing. That evening, while Iris did homework at the kitchen table, math problems about fractions and word problems about trains traveling at different speeds, Marcus reviewed the latest quarterly ethics report. Complaint volume was up 32%, which sounded bad until you understood it meant people finally believed the system would protect them. Resolution times were longer because investigations were thorough. Retaliation complaints had dropped to near zero because everyone knew the consequences were real and immediate. Iris brought him her latest drawing when she finished homework. This one showed a garden full of butterflies, all different colors, all helping flowers grow. At the bottom, in her increasingly confident handwriting, "We help make things beautiful." That's for your office, so you remember why your job is important. Marcus looked at the drawing, at his daughter's absolute faith that the work he did mattered, and felt the particular weight of being someone's hero, not in the dramatic sense of rescue and danger, but in the steady showing up, the daily choice to be someone worth believing in. Saturday morning, Marcus took Iris to the park near their apartment, the one with good climbing equipment and a view of the Cascade Mountains when the weather was clear. She ran ahead to the swings backpack, bouncing energy infinite in the way only 8-year-olds managed. He pushed her gently at first, then higher when she demanded it, her laughter echoing across the playground. When she jumped off at the peak of the arc, practiced and safe, a move they'd perfected over months, she landed with perfect balance and turned to him with a grin. "Did you see I flew?" "You did. You absolutely did." They sat on a bench afterwards, sharing the granola bars Marcus had remembered to pack. Iris leaned against him, comfortable and secure, and asked the question she'd been building toward for months. "Dad, are you happy now?" The question was more complicated than she knew, carrying weight about the year they'd survived together, the transformation they'd undergone, the person he'd become. "Yeah, kiddo, I am. Because you help people, because I kept my promises. To you, to myself, to people who needed someone to fight for them. That matters more than money or titles or whether people think I'm successful." She processed this with her usual seriousness, then delivered her verdict with the certainty of someone who'd watched her father transformed by crisis and believed absolutely in the outcome. "I'm proud of you." Marcus pulled her close. This small person who'd been his reason for everything, his motivation to stay upright when collapsing felt easier. His reminder that courage was something you practiced daily in small decisions that accumulated into character. "I'm proud of you too. You know why? Because I'm good at math. Because you believed in me when nobody else did. Because you trusted that doing right would matter even when it looked like it didn't. That took courage I'm not sure I would have had at your age." They watched the mountains in the distance, snow still visible on peaks despite the warmth reaching the valleys. Marcus thought about the past 6 months, the investigation that had uncovered systemic rot, the confrontation that had cost him safety but gained him integrity, the daily work of building something better than what had existed before. The world wasn't fixed. Power still protected itself. Systems still prioritized convenience over justice. But cracks had appeared in the foundation spaces where light could enter, precedents that made the next fight slightly easier than this one had been. Iris jumped up suddenly, energy returning, ready to attack the climbing structure with the focus she brought to everything. "Dad, come climb with me. I'm getting too old to hang upside down from monkey bars." "You're never too old, Shea. You taught me that. You changed into something better, like a butterfly. Now come on." Marcus followed her to the climbing structure, watching her scramble up with fearless confidence, and understood that this was what transformation looked like after the darkness, Not wings so much as wings earned, not flight so much as the courage to leave the ground. He climbed after her slower and more careful, but present, always present, because that was the promise that held their world together. Iris reached the top first and waited for him with that smile that made everything else, the fear, the risk, the fights with power worth whatever they'd cost. From the top, they could see the whole park spread below them, families playing, dogs running, the ordinary beautiful chaos of people living their lives. And Marcus understood that he'd been right 6 months ago. When he'd chosen truth over safety, some things mattered more than survival. Teaching his daughter that courage was possible, that systems could change, that one person refusing to compromise could crack foundations that was worth any price he'd been asked to pay. They climbed down together, Iris chattering about school and friends and the science fair project she wanted to do about butterflies and metamorphosis. Marcus listened with full attention, responding to her questions, suggesting resources, being exactly who she needed him to be, steady, present, unshakable. That night after dinner and homework, in the bedtime routine they'd perfected over years, Marcus sat outside Iris's room listening to her breathe and sleep, keeping the promise he'd made 1,000 times, I'll be right here. I won't let go. And in the morning he'd go back to work and keep fighting for a system that protected people instead of power. Keep building something better, brick by difficult brick. Keep teaching Iris through action instead of words that integrity wasn't optional and courage wasn't comfortable. But both were necessary if you wanted to make a difference. The butterfly on his office shelf would catch the light. The ethics reports would show progress. The complaints would keep coming because people finally believed they'd be heard. And Marcus would show up every day and do the work not because it was easy or guaranteed to succeed, but because it was right. Because some transformations only happen in darkness. Because gardens only grow when someone tends them. Because his daughter was drawing butterflies with capes, believing her father was exactly who he'd promised to be. Someone who showed up, who kept his word, who chose principle even when principle was expensive. That was enough. That was everything. And as Marcus finally went to bed in their small apartment that felt safer than penthouses, he understood that he'd become exactly what Iris had always seen in him. Not a hero in the dramatic sense, just someone decent and steady who refused to let go when things got hard. A man who'd found his wings in darkness. A father who'd kept his promises. Someone who'd learned that the scariest transformations led to the most meaningful growth, and that sometimes doing right cost you everything except the one thing that actually mattered, being someone your daughter could believe in.